Before we begin tonight's file, let me ask you something gently. From where are you watching right now? Are you resting in a quiet bedroom, headphones on, or perhaps you're sitting in a dark living room with only the glow of the screen for company? Take a moment to notice your surroundings, the hum of the room, the stillness of the night, because what follows is not just a story, it is a file, a piece of mystery, best heard when the world has grown quiet. Chapter 1. The Night of the Aerial Gate. They call it the Aerial Gate of Newfoundland, though no official record dares to use that phrase. In February 1978, a small fleet of Canadian fishing trawlers was returning to port near Bonavista Bay when the captains reported something extraordinary, an opening in the night sky, not clouds, not aurora, but a perfectly geometric oval of white light hanging above the Atlantic like a wound cut into the heavens. Multiple crews logged it in their ship journals, noting how compasses spun and radios went silent, though the sea itself was calm. Witnesses said a column of water rose beneath the light, as though gravity itself had bent, lifting the ocean upward into a liquid pillar. At the same time, radar stations along the coast picked up phantom echoes, blips of dozens of objects rising at impossible vertical speeds, vanishing once they passed through the glowing oval. The Canadian Department of National Defense classified the event as unverified atmospheric disturbance, but leaked telexes revealed that American NORAD stations were simultaneously tracking the same phenomenon, labeling it Transit Event 77A. What makes this case unique is not just the shared observations across civilians and military, but the sheer scale. For nearly 30 minutes, fishermen, radar crews, and even local residents watched as the oval pulsed brighter, releasing what looked like metallic fragments that hovered and regrouped like flocks of birds before shooting back upward. Scientists later compared descriptions to plasma discharges, but plasma does not leave behind metallic residue. Yet fragments were indeed recovered, tiny beads of metal found fused into fishing nets, analyzed at Dalhousie University in Halifax. The metallurgical report, buried for decades, was said to describe isotopic ratios inconsistent with terrestrial ore, specifically a high presence of scandium and yttrium, rare on Earth but often theorized in speculative papers as useful in advanced propulsion alloys. The report was never released publicly. The lead analyst resigned abruptly and moved overseas, refusing interviews until his death. But here is the deeper mystery. Weeks after the Newfoundland incident, U.S. satellite data recorded matching aerial gates over the Norwegian Sea and the South Atlantic near the Falklands, each time coinciding with missing aircraft reports that were quietly filed away. Were these natural events, experimental weapons, or windows? Eyewitnesses insist they saw vessels pass through, objects that moved as though guided, not debris caught in magnetic storms. Some ufologists argue this was the largest coordinated transit ever observed, a migration not of single craft but an armada. If true, then Newfoundland was not just a fishing accident of the skies, but a moment when the Earth's atmosphere itself was used as a highway, the oval a gate through which something immense passed silently above us. To this day, fishermen in Bonavista whisper of that night, as if they glimpsed not aliens descending to Earth, but an exodus of something leaving, returning home through a hole torn briefly in our own sky. Chapter 2. The Hudson Valley Phantom Wave. On the opposite side of the continent, in the Hudson Valley of New York, during the early 1980s, thousands of residents reported what has since been called the Phantom Wave, a series of mass UFO sightings so consistent, so widely documented that they remain one of the largest clusters of encounters in North American history. Between 1982 and 1986, reports poured in of immense, silent craft hovering above highways, towns, and rivers. Witnesses described formations of lights arranged in V-shapes or vast rectangles, moving slowly enough to be followed by car, yet vanishing in an instant when approached. Police switchboards lit up nightly, receiving hundreds of calls. Even skeptical officers admitted they saw enormous objects the size of football fields, blotting out stars. One of the most famous accounts came from March 24th, 1983, when over 300 people across multiple counties reported a single silent craft drifting low over the Hudson River. Air traffic controllers recorded nothing on radar, yet police officers, doctors, pilots, and families all told the same story. Newspapers ran cautious headlines, "Strange lights continue over Hudson," but behind the scenes, the FAA and military scrambled. Declassified documents later revealed that West Point cadets were ordered not to discuss sightings they had witnessed on the academy grounds, even though several students sketched nearly identical triangular craft in their private notebooks. The so-called debunking explanation that pranksters were flying ultralight planes in formation quickly unraveled when experts noted that ultralights could not hover silently for hours nor accelerate from standstill to supersonic speeds without sound. Even more chilling is the data recorded by amateur astronomers at the time who measured electromagnetic distortions during the sightings. Compasses skewed, batteries drained, telescopes lost calibration. Some even claimed that the light formations shifted in direct response to flashlight beams or car headlights, as though acknowledging human presence. Skeptics chalked it up to mass hysteria, but hysteria does not leave behind power grid anomalies, nor explain why the New York State Power Authority logged unexplained surges during several of the major sighting nights. And then there are the abductions, cases quietly collected by researchers, in which individuals in the Hudson Valley reported lost time, strange scars, and recurring dreams of being examined under blinding light while triangular shapes loomed above. A local psychiatrist compiled over a dozen cases, noting shared details of beings with almond eyes and gray skin, but his work was dismissed as suggestive therapy. Still, the consistency is disturbing. What was the phantom wave? A test of experimental stealth dirigibles, as some claim? Or was Hudson Valley chosen as a corridor, much like Pine Gap or Highway 375, for something larger moving across Earth? The witnesses number in the thousands, the files are real, and the fear still lingers. Ask any longtime resident, and they will tell you those were not planes. They were something else, something that came night after night, patient and silent, reminding a valley of ordinary people that their skies were never truly their own. Chapter 3: The A-70 Abduction Files of Scotland. It began as a quiet summer evening in 1992 when two friends, Gary Wood and Colin Wright, were driving along the A-70 highway near Edinburgh, Scotland. They were headed toward the small village of Tarbrax, a trip that should have lasted no more than 30 minutes. Yet, as their car crested a dark hill, both men noticed a black disc-shaped object hanging motionless above the road. At first, they thought it was a helicopter silhouetted against the night, until they realized it made no sound, no movement, and no signal lights. When Gary accelerated to pass beneath it, the world itself seemed to shudder. A blinding light engulfed their car, and then silence. What should have been seconds turned into an absence neither man could explain. When they finally reached Tarbrax, Both were confused to discover they were 2 hours late. Their watches, the car clock, even their sense of time betrayed them. They had no memory of the missing hours, only a dull exhaustion and a growing terror. Soon after, strange marks appeared on their bodies, circular bruises and puncture-like wounds that resisted healing. Both men sought hypnosis, desperate to uncover what had happened. What surfaced under regression was not the stuff of sleep paralysis or drunken hallucinations, but a story so consistent, so visceral, it became one of Scotland's most infamous abduction cases. They described being pulled from their car into a sterile environment, confronted by beings neither fully human nor machine. Gary recalled their skin as gray and almost translucent, their eyes black and lidless, their hands unnervingly long. But most disturbing was the sense of being studied, of being treated not as individuals, but as specimens. They spoke of invasive medical procedures, devices pressed to their skulls, instruments scanning their bodies with searing heat, voices not spoken aloud, but echoing inside their heads. Researchers investigating the case found disturbing corroborations. Patches of scorched grass at the site where the encounter allegedly occurred, unusual electromagnetic readings on the road, and most notably, an eerie silence reported by other motorists that night, as though birds and insects had gone mute in the area. When word leaked, skeptics dismissed it as a classic abduction fantasy. Yet Scotland's Ministry of Defence quietly opened a file, noting persistent civilian reports of low-altitude craft in central Scotland during the same month. Even the police confirmed unusual call logs of bright aerial lights. What sets the A-70 case apart from other abduction stories is not just the detail, but the aftermath. Both Gary and Colin reported recurring nightmares of mechanical corridors, of being dragged down metallic tunnels lined with blinding lights. Gary later confessed to researchers that he believed he had been implanted with something metallic in his neck, an object doctors never found, but which caused him lifelong pain. In 1996, the Ministry of Defense abruptly closed its file, citing no further action, yet the official silence only deepened suspicions. To this day, the A-70 abduction remains one of Europe's most chilling X-Files. Two ordinary men driving a rural road, swallowed by missing time, and spat back into the world, altered, haunted, and convinced that humanity is not the only species conducting experiments in the dark. Chapter 4: The Kecksburg Crash, America's Forgotten Roswell. On December 9, 1965, a fiery object streaked across the skies of Pennsylvania, blazing so brightly it was seen as far as Ontario and Detroit. Eyewitnesses described it as a brilliant fireball, moving too slowly to be a meteor, trailing sparks before descending into the wooded hills near the town of Kecksburg. Within hours, the rural community was swarming with military trucks, jeeps, and armed personnel who cordoned off the area. Locals who ventured close reported seeing a metallic acorn-shaped craft embedded in the forest floor, about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, glowing faintly as if from residual heat. Some swore strange markings. Hieroglyphic-like symbols were etched around its base, not in English, Russian, or any known script. Before nightfall, soldiers had erected floodlights and tents, blocking civilian access. By dawn, the craft was gone. Witnesses claim they saw it loaded onto a flatbed truck, covered in tarp, escorted by a convoy heading toward Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the same facility rumored to house debris from Roswell. Officially, NASA and the U.S. Air Force dismissed the event as a meteor, but leaked memos years later revealed that the Air Force recovery team, logged a metallic artifact retrieval in the Kecksburg coordinates. Journalists who pushed too hard for answers found their FOIA requests denied, documents missing, and witnesses suddenly unwilling to talk. Yet fragments of the story seeped through. A volunteer firefighter who claimed he briefly saw the craft was later visited by men in plain clothes who warned him never to speak again. Another witness, a teenage boy at the time, reported hearing a humming noise emanating from the object, like machinery cooling down. Ufologists speculate that the Kecksburg craft was not an alien ship, but a failed Soviet satellite, possibly part of the Cosmos series. But aerospace engineers countered. No Soviet satellite was shaped like an acorn, and no satellite could have survived re-entry intact without catastrophic breakup. The mystery deepens when examining the alleged symbols on the craft. One sketch leaked by a witness closely resembles symbols reported by Roswell witnesses decades earlier, patterns of circles and lines that defy linguistic classification but echo geometric forms found in ancient cultures. Could the Kecksburg crash have been another Roswell, only better contained, better silenced, buried in the folds of Cold War paranoia? More disturbingly, researchers point out that the Kecksburg object's trajectory did not align with the satellite's decaying orbit. Instead, it appeared to maneuver, slowing before impact as though under intelligent control. If so, Kecksburg was not debris falling from space, but a controlled descent that failed. Locals to this day speak of the forest as haunted, recounting odd lights and unearthly hums lingering in the woods where the craft fell. Unlike Roswell, Kecksburg never entered mainstream culture, smothered by the government before it could grow. But among UFO researchers, it remains the smoking gun that was smothered. A night when something not human fell to earth was swiftly hidden and left only whispers and scorched earth as testimony. Chapter 5: The Colares laser attacks of Brazil. Of all UFO encounters catalogued in dusty archives, few are as terrifyingly physical as what unfolded in 1977 on the tiny island of Colares off the northern coast of Brazil. Here, under a sweltering Amazonian sky, hundreds of villagers claim that craft glowing spheres, cigar-shaped machines, and discs the size of houses descended nightly, not simply hovering but attacking. Locals called them chupa-chupa or suck-suck lights because they seemed to beam concentrated rays of energy directly into people's bodies. These were not vague lights on the horizon. Witnesses described them in detail, machines humming with low vibrations, emitting beams that struck victims with enough force to knock them unconscious. Medical records from the town's small clinic still survive, documenting burns, puncture-like wounds, and strange marks that glowed faintly under ultraviolet light. Victims reported paralysis, dizziness, and most disturbingly, a profound loss of blood, as though something was being extracted. In some cases, autopsies revealed abnormal hemoglobin depletion, a condition no natural predator could cause. The Brazilian government could not ignore it. The panic grew so severe that residents refused to leave their homes at night. Windows were barricaded with metal sheets, and whole families slept in churches with candles burning, begging protection from what they believed were predators from the sky. In response, the Brazilian Air Force launched Operation Prato, one of the largest official UFO investigations in history. For months, officers camped on Colares, photographing strange craft, interviewing terrified villagers, and even witnessing the beams themselves. For declassified reports released decades later confirmed what locals had always insisted. The military recorded not only the lights, but the wounds, the radiation spikes, and the sheer terror sweeping through the island. One officer admitted in his later years that he saw a glowing disk emerge from the sea, beam energy at a fisherman, and retreat silently into the sky. It was not human technology, he confessed. We were being observed, and more than observed, harvested. But here's the detail that chills most researchers. Victims often described feeling as though their very vitality was being drained, leaving them fatigued for weeks. Doctors noted red patches on their chests, as if from focused heat. Some theorists suggest the beams were extracting blood plasma, or perhaps genetic material, in a way eerily similar to cattle mutilations reported in North America. Yet these were not cattle. They were humans, terrified and screaming, their suffering documented in military files. The case was eventually closed, officially explained as mass hysteria combined with natural phenomena. But why, then, did dozens of photographs, films, and reports remain classified until the 2000s? Why did the lead investigator, Captain Urange Hollanda, later die under suspicious circumstances after revealing details of the encounters to the press? Colares remains one of the rare cases where UFO encounters were not lights in the sky, not whispers of missing time, but direct assaults, aggressive, calculated, and leaving scars not only on the bodies of its victims, but on the collective memory of an entire island community. To this day, older residents whisper of the Chupa Chupa, lowering their voices, afraid the lights might one night return. And so the file closes here, softly, like the hush of wind across a midnight field. But its silence is not comforting. We have wandered through convoys that vanish on open highways, through signals that hum beneath Pine Gap, through anomalies humming in the Baltic Deep, through black-eyed children knocking softly at midnight, through crashes buried in Pennsylvanian forests, and finally into the terror of Colares, where beams from the sky left real burns on human skin. Each case alone unsettles. Together, they form a lattice of stories, too consistent to dismiss, too global to ignore, suggesting that the Earth itself is not merely observed, but used, visited, and perhaps even partitioned by forces that remain unseen. Skeptics laugh, but laughter cannot erase the scars on the villagers of Brazil, the burned axle in Nevada, or the missing hours on Scotland's A70. These files remain open not because they lack endings, but because the endings are not ours to write. As you lie now in the quiet of your room, with the night pressing close and the hum of your own world steady in your ears, let the thought linger, not to frighten you, but to remind you that mystery still breathes around us. The sky is vast, the ocean's deep, and the files never truly close. Sleep gently, traveler. Somewhere in the silence, the next transmission is already waiting.